Hello and welcome to another episode of A View from the Top. I'm Adrian Cropley. A View from the Top is a regular podcast from the Centre for Strategic Communication Excellence, where I interview some of the world's leading communication professionals as we explore their career journey. And I'm so pleased in this episode that I get to chat with an all-time great communication professional and heavy hitter of internal communication globally, Paulo Soares, who's also a faculty member with the Centre for Strategic Communication Excellence. Paulo is an accredited communication professional and is currently Corporate Communications Director for IBRAM, which is the Brazilian Mining Institute. And any wonder he heads up the communications for IBRAM after many years working in the mining sector, in many roles, including communications director for Vale and a global role that took him right around the world. Paulo has been such an influence within our profession globally and very well-known presence in the South American market. He is indeed a leader, an author, and a thought leader within our profession. So I'm pleased to welcome Paulo. We go back many years and in fact sat our accreditation or our business accreditation exam together prior to an IABC World Conference after flying over 24 hours. I think it was longer for you, Paulo, coming in to sit that exam. And boy, what an experience that was. Welcome, Paulo. It's great to have you here.
Well, thank you, Adrian. It's my pleasure to be with you here. Thank you.
And did you get over the experience of sitting that exam? Wasn't that the most grueling day? It was like three and a half hours, the two of us doing that exam.
Well, if it was hard for you, imagine for me that is not an English speaker. I'm not fluent in English as you are, so it was even harder. But yes, it was a different experience. You know, we had our careers, we had to work in different places, and suddenly you go back to, to take a test to make sure you know what you should know. So that was very, very interesting for me.
It always seems like a long time when you do things like your certification or accreditation. It's much later in your career and you tend to forget what that experience was like when you were doing exams, even in high school and university, and you go, "Oh my stars, that was brutal."
Yeah, that is absolutely right. But I enjoyed it. I think when you put a goal for yourself in your career and you go for it and then you achieve, that's a very good feeling that you have. And that's what happened to me, to be the first Brazilian to be accredited by IABC was a very important achievement for me.
It was, and it was such an exciting time to see that you got your accreditation, which was the first for Brazil. And I think, over the years, seeing people in different markets starting to get that accreditation was great. And of course, now it's a new certification process, and it's nice to start seeing that grow around the world as well. But it's interesting, we're talking about exams, and I might take you back a little bit. And I have to have an admission here, Paulo. It's not often that I get to talk to communication professionals who actually studied communication in their courses. They've all come left of field, including myself, from different. But you studied communication back at university.
Yes, I did. Well, that puts us, different university systems around the world, and in Brazil, you have to choose a field when you start, and usually the field that you end up working is the field you have started studying. So it's rare that you see people, changing or having the opportunity to work in something that they haven't studied. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's not very common. So if you go into business, you work with business. If you take communication, you work with communication. So and the communication in Brazil, the universities are very, very strong, and the courses are some of them very hard even to get into. So
was that kind of the natural thing that you would, obviously, if that was the system and the way it worked, that's what you would go on and do? Or did you actually find a passion for it while you were doing the university course and going, actually, I do like this?
Yeah. When I started, we often start very young. You're not sure. You're not 100% sure of what your work will be. And actually, I had the chance to work in a very good university here and have the chance to have excellent professors. And I did internship during I was studying, which allowed me actually to see what part of communication I wanted to go. When I started, I thought I would end up in an agency, like advertising agency. So that was my passion at the time when I started the university. And suddenly I said, maybe that's not what I want to work with advertising. And I ended up working with organizations, and that was great. And I found out a field that I never thought of, which is internal communication and working, strategically with your outside stakeholders. So that was quite interesting, the opportunity that I had along my career.
Where were you working at the time when you went into internal communication? How did that come about for you, that you ended up in internal comms?
My whole career is in mining. So as you have mentioned, I worked for over 21 years for the biggest mining company in Brazil, Vale. And then when I started there, I started working with outside stakeholders. I was responsible to receive all clients and political representatives and governments to visit a mine. So I would take them around and explain our process. And that was quite interesting, something that I never thought could be linked to the business. Yeah. And as I was there, I found out there was some communicators working internally. And, we're doing the very basic, which is, you run an internal newspaper, you put billboards, and you put something on the walls. And at that time, that's what I thought internal communication was. And as I would go on, I realized how complex this process is and how exciting it is to have the chance to work with employees. And probably, 3-4 years after I was working at Vale, I realized this was a huge field for all of us as communicators. So that's when I started studying. That's when I started looking to the process we would do and trying to improve it in a strategic way. And then I found out that even we could have the best internal vehicles like newsletter, internet. I'm the time when the internet.
I know what you're going to say.
Okay, so let's jump that. Okay, so I saw the start of the internet and this technological issues, and and then I said, well, there's something missing here, and what is the gap? And then that's when I by studying, by reading, by going to IABC conferences, I said, well, what about those managers? What do they do? Are they just leaders? Are they managers? Are they leaders? What are their influences in our employees? And then you kind of a light just, I saw a big light in front of me. I said, gosh, those leaders are actually the ones responsible for the engagement in the company. And, very few people in Brazil, was talking about it. I've learned a lot. I had to study a lot. And then I decided to, try new things. And, the first things that we did was so let's go get those leaders and find out who are the, good leaders and not so good leaders and the ones that need improvement. And then we used, communication techniques to support those leaders to be better leaders and to actually communicate with their teams.
Look, you made a real difference in the organization. And I look at this as very, you and I are on very parallel planes when it came to internal communication, because it was around the same vintage where, you know, we were just getting into the technology and intranet and what that all meant to an organization. But you saw the real value in communicating or building the communication skills of your leaders. And I know you did a lot of work in building the capacity of communication within Vale, working with the leaders. Do you think that's what made you, I don't know, much more influential in the organization, is because you really understood the leaders and what their capabilities needed to be?
Yeah. Maybe I don't know if that happens around the world, but certainly here in Brazil, the experience that I have had is just you have influence in an organization when you show you have values. Yeah. You have to it, and you are actually not doing your business just to do because it's nice, because it's interesting, but you show that you have value. And in Brazil, in the past, usually only the people working with press would be valued to the CEO, because they are the ones who would support the leaders to engage with external stakeholders, and sometimes tricky stakeholder as journalists. So most leaders in Brazil in the past would only see value if you were this person doing this relationship and supporting leaders to actually engage with the journalist and looking nice on the next day newspaper. And which doesn't exist anymore.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's a 24/7 issue. And when you're working with something as internal comms or employee communication, you realize that if you're only there to say, oh, I'm doing this because employees need to be informed, or I'm doing this because it's nice for them to know what's happening, you're being very tactical. And I realize that if you support your leaders and you show them that actually employees are the most important stakeholders in any organizations, around anywhere, in any business, they will say, well, I never thought of that. And then if you show them that maybe they are now ready to do this strategic communication, because everyone can communicate, everyone can talk, everyone can show, and everyone can explain. But that doesn't mean you're good at this, and that doesn't mean your goals are being achieved. Yeah. So that's why I say that it's important that you actually show the difference when you support them in this employee communication. And that's when I think that at least I realized that you could influence the C-level of the company.
And what happened in your career as you started getting that recognized how important it was? Because we won't downplay what it takes to actually get internal communication recognized within an organization. I mean, even today, still people are in their organizations trying to influence, but there's certain things that you do that really, and you've addressed a lot of those, is getting those runs on the board and getting credibility within the leaders. What keeps you credible in front of those leaders? So if you were to share some of your tips to up-and-coming professionals, What keeps you relevant? What keeps you credible?
I think you got to be very honest with all of them. And it's hard because most of them are your bosses. Most of them are more important than you are in the organization. And most of them really don't understand what you mean when you try to technically explain what's going to happen. I say that I've worked all my careers with a lot of engineers, and I've learned how they think. And, they want facts and numbers. For them, 2 + 2 is always 4. And in our career, in our area, it's we have a little, let's say we are more humans. So that means, things are not as we always plan. And you actually have to explain and show them there are many ways, maybe you want to get to 4. Instead of adding 2 plus 2, you can add, 1 plus 3, and you'll get the same result. But sometimes, you add and you don't come to 4. And you have to understand, because we're dealing with human beings. We're dealing with feelings. We're dealing with fears. We're dealing with power. We're dealing with all those things that most managers are not used to, because they are more into 2 plus 2 equals 4. So you have to show them, and you have to be very open and say, well, I think that's the best way. There are other ways, but maybe this will be the best way. And sometimes I would lose those discussions, and you can't just say, oh, I'm not doing this. You will do it as the group has decided, or as your CEO has decided, but you have to keep in mind to show him or her afterwards that maybe your suggestion, you will get better results.
Yes.
Or you could get the same results with better quality, which are different things. Yeah. So that's why it's very, very important that you keep connected and you work very open with them, explaining your thoughts and your paths.
And I think that openness really, really works with them, because it's very much like building that relationship with them, so you can have that trusting peer relationship with the managers that you're working for and the executives that you're working for. But you worked in a very issues-rich environment. I mean, mining is, we think internal communications is tricky in most organizations, but in mining it's even more tricky, because it's not just an issues-rich or environment, but also, the amount of people that work in mine sites and access to communication channels is really quite limited. It'd be great for you to share some of the ways you connected with a lot more of your remote workers in mining, if you don't mind.
Sure. Mining is a very interesting world, and I was very lucky to be in this world and learn a lot in the field. Most of my career, I've always worked in the sites and not in corporate office, and was only a few years back that I moved to different positions. But even when I was a corporate area, I love to spend most of my time in the field talking to the employees, talking to local stakeholders and understanding. So something that I forgot to mention that I would just like to bring it here is that when you're working in a business, you do have to understand everything about the business, and that makes a difference. So when I'm talking to anyone in the mining business, even though my background is not mining, I bet I can, argue and, bring facts about in 80% of the conversation. I'll lose only 20% because I'm a communicator. So I'm not that. Back to your question about working with employees that are not sitting in front of a computer. First of all, that showed me that connection and let's say had to be different. When you have a person that works underground or on 12-hour shift or 8-hour shift, they sometimes they work in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon, sometimes at night. That is a completely different employee. But on the other hand, they're very engaged and they are very passionate for what they do. So you first have to understand the environment. You first have to understand the context, and then you got to find the organization's strategy so you can connect what you do. I mean, you can't do anything in communication if you don't link to the company's strategy, because if you don't have that link, and that's what I always look, you're just doing, and it could be any organization, because you're just doing something. You're just producing. I say that's our bakery. You go to a bakery and ask, give me the bread, and you give the bread. Oh, now give me a cake. You give the cake. We can't be a bakery. I mean, because, we don't know. You have to put in a context. You have to ask what are the desires, what are their wishes, what are their fears, and different fears from different places, from different sites, from different situations. So that's why our profession, and especially working with employee communication, is so beautiful, because it all depends on so many factors that we have to take in consideration. So my tips for people working with employees in different situations is you have to create opportunities for them to connect with the company, with their leaders, and in a specific way. So you have to have a frequency, and you also have to have constance. I don't know if the word is that, but you have to be constant about what you're doing. So if you have frequency and if you have the same speech and the same objectives, you will reach there. And then you have to choose your channels. As you choose your channels are important. But as I said, don't forget about the leader, because she's the one who will make the most difference in the relation between employees and the organizations.
And look, I absolutely take away from what you and I have been talking about so far is the role of the leader is absolutely critical. I mean, and that relationship with the leader and the trust within the leader. And I really value those tips, particularly working with remote employees. So it really goes back to that relationship being so important. And funny enough, I now have this analogy playing through my head when you were using the baking analogy, and I think communication is one of those roles where you're given a bag of groceries, and it's not until you look inside that you go, "What on earth am I going to make from these ingredients?" I think that's we're never given the right ingredients, but we have to create some magic, don't we?
That's like a master chef, one of those. That you get a box and say, cook something. And then you say, oh my God. And you don't have to use all the recipients. You don't have to use, you don't have to put everything in the same pot, because it's not going to work. Maybe you have to have smaller dishes that you do and you serve, and people will enjoy it. And I usually, when people ask me, how do you know that people will actually understand what you're doing, or actually, value the communication? I give an example very quick that we have 5 steps in communication. Yeah. The first step would be you have to reach the person. If we give an example on employee communication, or it can be advertising, whatever you say on social media, on TV, on the newspaper, or in an internal channel, this has to be reached by the person. So that's step number 1. Step number 2 is this person has to consume your information. So you can receive the information, but maybe you don't use it, or you don't read it, or you don't watch a movie, or you don't look at the post. So it's receive, then consume, and after consuming, you have to the person has to understand what's being written, or what has been posted, or what has been put on the video. So it's receiving, consuming, and then understanding. And after the understanding, you have the fourth step, which is agreeing. You got to agree with what is written or what is said in that specific material. And the last one, and the most important one, you have to agree and do an action, because we all communication for a final action. So let's say, we are in the middle of a pandemic. Let's say that we have found a vaccine for the COVID-19, and then you're going to ask all your employees to go and take the vaccine. At the end of the day, if they don't take it, your whole process of communicating has failed. So that's why I've always worked with those 5 steps.
That's really, and thank you. That's a really great share and very insightful, Paulo. I want to move into a different area. There's a couple of things I want to touch on during this podcast. One is that you moved then into the Institute for Mining within Brazil. How did you end up in that world? What was the opportunity, or was it time to move into something different?
It was time to move into something different, but the same.
Yes, I was going to say still in mining, but kind of flipped onto the other side.
Yeah, welcome to the other same side of the coin. Well, Adrian, it was something important. The move was important, and I've been working with with our mining companies now. So I run this committee with our communication directors and managers for our companies, our mining companies working in Brazil. So that has brought me a different perspective of our profession. And I'm doing less, employee communication now, and I'm doing more strategic engagement and PR and also advertising and working with the reputation of the sector, which is another passion that I have found out is that at the end of the day we can support and create either just or improve the reputation of companies, and that's also very interesting for us to think and work with.
Look, and I think there's one thing that's always resonated for me about you, Paulo, and that is you've got this real gift of giving back to the profession, and you've done this over many years, getting involved with the associations both in the Latin American markets, IEBC globally. You were on the board with me some years ago, and also you've written a couple of books that I know about. Is it 2 or was there more books that you've written?
It was a full book, but I have worked with many papers, academic papers, and also professional papers about many different subjects.
What drove you to writing and authoring a book?
I think this sharing issue that you have mentioned, it's been very important in my career. And when I started, I heard the founder of the school where I went to, and he came and said, if what you're going through is not good enough, you gotta come back and help us to make it better.
Yeah,
and
I like that
sentence, because if you think it's not good enough, you gotta go back and support someone to make it better. Complaining is very easy. Changing and getting involved is tricky.
Yeah.
So that's why I've always thought that being engaged and giving back would be important for my career, but it would be important for somebody else's career. So I felt a lack at the university of practical experience and being connected with the market. So every time somebody invited me to go back and give speeches at the universities and colleges, I would accept. Yeah. And because that's an opportunity that you have to, if you touch one person, that you've done your job. And I've got many feedbacks of people that I was able to support and help. And actually, it's just a help. You don't do anything but just help this person to look at a different way or to see the problems they're facing and actually, doing the right choices that they might want to do while they're studying, or even when they are starting their career, or even when they are in the middle of their career. Or anyway, so that's why I think it's important to give back. And people complain, but they don't support or they don't act.
Well, I have to say, I thank you for continuing to support the profession as a whole. As I said at the beginning of this, is You really are one of the heavy hitters when it comes to communication. I know you often don't look at yourself that way, but certainly it's appreciated from our profession of what you do give. And I've known you give in terms of research and finding funding for research and all sorts of things. So thank you for what you continually do, Paulo, in the profession.
Thank you.
And thank you for spending time with me today.
Well, my pleasure, Adrian. It's always a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you. And actually, I say that when you engage with something, you always get back more than you give.
Yeah.
So people think that when you do a volunteer work in an association, that, I'm going to lose time, or I'm going just to give my time. I think I always find the opposite. I learn much more than what I give. And what I learned from IABC, from the relationship and the opportunities that we had to chat and talk, they were very important for my whole career. So it's just like, let's move from mining to, like when you're a farmer, you only can get what you plant. You can't, if you don't plant, you can't collect something in the future. So that's why I think that, planting those relationships and planting those volunteer works are very important for you when you do that. But you can't do that looking at you. You got to do that looking at somebody else. And that's why it's important.
Well, thank you for those amazing parting words. And this is a great time to leave it on a great piece that people can reflect on. So thank you again, Paulo. And thanks to everyone for tuning in to this episode of A View from the Top. I look forward to catching up with you all next time.